Okay.
Well, hello to you wherever you are, whatever time it is. I'm at Calvin's house on the Ridge Road in Champlain again, and we're here on February 24th, 2011 to talk about Plattsburghers. Until we started talking about the Plattsburgh Idea, the forerunner of ROTC and all the summer camps that they had for people here around the Plattsburgh barracks and around the North Country, I thought the word Plattsburgher was a relatively modern term, Calvin. Did you know that before you saw that book?
I never given it much thought, I
But
guess.
things like that interest me. And I hear, and I do a little research here, excuse me, here and there, and I saw that they were called Plattsburghers. People came from all around.
Literally all around the USA, yeah.
All around the United States to come here. A lot of business people, a lot of private people, a lot of well-to-do people, right?
Some very well-to-do people, as we'll see as we get into this. This is really our third installment and final.
And final? You sure about that?
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Sometimes a new chapter opens up.
On the Plattsburgh Idea.
Yeah.
And if I got to reemphasize this, that if people are searching for anything about the Plattsburgh Idea in this era from 1915, 16, and 17, you got to spell Plattsburgh without an H if you're going to be accurate. Sometimes you find stuff from that era with an H, but Plattsburgh at that time was without the H on the Berg. So the Plattsburgh Idea has no H on the Berg. So if you put Plattsburgh Idea with an H, you may not come up with
You're
this
liable to
stuff.
get books and movies and mostly things about Plattsburgh State, as a matter of fact, about the college, if you put down Plattsburgh Idea.
Now, it might seem like yesterday that we did part two. Part one, of course, is when we went to Judge Penny Klute's law offices and the courts, and we saw all that stuff that she has put up there and the research she has done. And we talked about Booth, and you and I later did what we called part two of the Plattsburgh Idea. Now, just looking at it just before you came, just to get at the very beginning of it, and just it astounded me that you were saying January 2007. It's been 4 years since we did that part two. I thought
it takes us a while to catch up with ourselves. We get so busy and go off on other tangents. But this is a most important story for Plattsburgh, for the history of the military installation here in Plattsburgh, the Plattsburgh Barracks, as they called it back then, the Old Base Oval, which are familiar terms to people who live around this area. But you would be amazed, even after all of our hard work in the previous two chapters, how many people have no clue what the Plattsburgh Idea is. So we're here to educate and inform.
Yes, and unfortunately neither one of us was able to go as we're speaking here on this last Thursday in February. Last Friday they had a meeting. They're trying to do something to save the old stone barracks in Plattsburgh to make sure it's not use isn't going the wrong direction. And people don't understand the history that those barracks really have.
No, as a matter of fact, there's a great deal of misinformation. As many people know who are watching this program, I love to write ghost stories. And there is a great deal of misinformation about the old stone barracks on the internet. Talk about Revolutionary War soldiers and so on. And that building wasn't constructed until 1838, which is far after the Revolutionary War. It's a wonderful place. I love to see it when it's lit up at night. I don't mind saying here, as long as we've opened that can of worms, if you will, I would hate to see the whole area, even though the building wasn't destroyed, I would hate to see it surrounded by other buildings, which would disrupt the view when you're coming up Route 9. It warms your heart to see that old building, and I would like to see something done with it.
Yes, but unfortunately, time marches on, and even if it survives, I think it will be surrounded by modern buildings. And
probably so.
If you bought it as an investment, you're going to have to make something out of it, and the people who are buying it,
that's
the
true.
city and everybody else had an opportunity to purchase it, and nobody stepped forward.
If you go to Rome, Italy, you're going to see a lot of modern buildings around the Colosseum. So,
That's right.
so anyway, it is fun, and I think we consider it part of our obligation at Hometown Cable in our little corner to bring up these little historical points every now and again to let people know what a wonderful area we live in and how rich it is in history.
Well, here in 2011, we just seems like yesterday we were doing the quadricentennial for Champlain, but that's 2 years ago already. Now we're getting into the 150th anniversary of the Civil War era, and we've got the Battle of Plattsburgh coming up in 2014, the 20th anniversary of that.
Which is a lot closer than it seemed when we started talking about it.
And starting next year with 2012, a lot of commemorations will be going on concerning the War of 1812, because we were certainly in this area that we reside, we were certainly in the midst of it all. And shortly after we finished with the Battle of Plattsburgh, which would be 200th anniversary in 2014, we're going to move into 2015, and that'll be the 100th anniversary of the start of the Plattsburg Idea. So these folks there that are into history at those museums in Plattsburgh can carry on and get into that. And another thing we'll be talking on at the end is something else that we're celebrating a history of in this era that we're in right now, but we'll get into that shortly because that's a separate show. But I think the 100th anniversary coming up of the Plattsburgh Idea is something that should be commemorated and celebrated, because without this Plattsburgh Idea, this world could be a far, far different place.
And there would be no ROTC for the uninitiated Reserve Officer Training Corps. Was a direct child of this Plattsburgh Idea when these businessmen were trained here for 2 summers. And it wasn't just like the maneuvers that we covered on a previous program in the 1930s. This was a big deal. And it was the subject of a great deal of controversy at the time, because people who know me and people who know Calvin and have listened to our programs and watched them know that Teddy Roosevelt loved this idea. He came here and gave some fiery speeches, but there wasn't universal approval in the United States government, and he had a tremendous ongoing battle with President Wilson during those times, because the federal government was telling Teddy Roosevelt at that time, well, only rich people are going to go there. What good is it going to do? So history proved Teddy right.
Yes, and
you still looked like him when you had your mustache.
well, and obviously there's pacifists who say, never mind what's going on in Europe, we don't want to become a part of it. In part 2 of the series that we're doing, we talked about the start of the era of World War I, which was then known as the Great War. But the things that happened in Europe that led to this, and as you and I are speaking here today, the turmoil that's going on in northern Africa is just it's downright scary.
Well, it is. All you got to do is drive to your gas pump today and fill your car up and see how much it costs. And imagine that with a tremendous increase in prices for diesel fuel, we thought our groceries are going up high in the last couple of months. Just wait until summertime. It is frightening.
Well, you and I are certainly, and most of the people watching are old enough to remember in the mid '70s when gas rationing was part of our life. We didn't have to go back to World War II. You bought gas on opposite days.
1972.
Depending on your license plate,
that's exactly right.
You bought it either on an odd day or an even day. And when you pull up to the pump, there were 15, 20 cars ahead of you waiting to gas up.
And as we're recording this program on the 24th of February 2011, the price of oil has gone again, for the first time in quite a few years, to over $100 a barrel. So, a lot of things in the world can affect a lot of other things, and we're going to find out in the next few months how many things are affected by this upheaval in that part of the world.
Yeah, so just briefly, the Plattsburgh Idea came about because there were soldiers and citizens in the U.S. who saw what was happening in Europe, and knew that eventually we would be dragged into it. So they wanted to make sure that there were officers that were capable to lead the troops, and you couldn't just grab a guy out of Wall Street or out of a ball bearing factory and say you're now a second lieutenant. They needed training. So this was the Plattsburgh Idea started, that these people would come here on their own dime. They paid to come to this camp.
Yeah, non-military people, private citizens, businessmen and others, politicians, absolutely, and they paid for it.
And they paid for it, and they came here, and they learned how the troops would be in the field. They learned how to become an officer, and it was just maybe a 3 or 4 week period. And some came back. Some came back the following year, but they roughed it. They were out in tents and
did.
marching in the.
they got wet,
Yeah.
and they bathed in the streams, and and some of those streams didn't have very clean water. Oh my goodness!
So this is some of the stuff we covered the Plattsburgher last time we were together, and we also covered a little bit about the Citizen Soldiers, which was written by John Gary Clifford, that covered the Plattsburgh training camp movement from 1913 to 1920. But this military training camps continued throughout that period following the war, and in the 20s and 30s there were camps, and then that led to this 1939 war maneuvers that you talked about. That we did a nice story with Nap Light on the 1939 war maneuvers.
That was great.
And it's just a piece of history that I'd never realized, and the people who
that knew about it didn't realize the scope of it until
Yeah.
they saw our program.
Yeah.
We're talking lots and lots of people.
Yeah.
The same kinds of things that happened during those 6-week summer camps in 1915 and 16 were happening again in the 1930s with the townspeople involved too, right?
Yes.
There's almost groupies.
Now, those camps, of course, continued, and as I said, in '39, before our involvement in World War II, we had Army maneuvers here, and of course, that area, as you know, later became the Plattsburgh Air Force Base, and it has nothing to do with our show, really, but I did find a couple of
Look
things.
at the stuff. You got more treasures.
This is a 1954 ad, or this is actually, so here's a newspaper art. No, it's an ad from Caterpillar Tractors showing the construction of the Plattsburgh Air Force Base.
I've never seen that before.
Yeah, and
I can only imagine that my picture might be in there hiding behind a shovel somewhere.
it might be. And here's the one from Gulf Oil. And
nice shape, isn't it?
Here's a nice shot. It's got several different locations here, but this is one. This particular one here is of Plattsburgh Air Force Base. So if you might be there in a
Could be in there. My brother could be in there. That looks like part of the runway.
constructing the runway.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Boy, those are it's amazing. Calvin finds these things on the internet.
It just
It's nice to own something like that because it does reinforce my personal memories.
the Caterpillar ad has several shots of the construction, and it's just a piece of history that there's probably not too many shots of the construction hanging around out there, and this
Well, it actually is a part of what we're talking about because
it's a continuation.
the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base was a continuation of what was then the longest continually operating military installation in the country, because there have been people from all the wars all the way back to the Revolutionary War involved in things around this area. $80 million construction for Plattsburgh Jet Bomber Base. It seems like the numbers we're throwing around today in the trillions. That 80 million doesn't seem like much, but I love the headline. Rugged yellow machines and engines help speed 3,882,500 cubic yards of excavation for 10,000-foot runway and other projects. Anybody who's been stationed here, anybody who's visited a former Plattsburgh Air Force Base know that that is one big piece of concrete.
Or anybody that's flying out of the Plattsburgh International Airport
That too,
right now.
right now. Absolutely.
So, yep. So
Oh, that's great,
those are
Calvin.
pictures of its construction. But
Wonderful.
we're now going to travel back, though, to 1915. And this is Scientific American. And this is August 28th, 1915. The Plattsburgh Businessmen's Training Camp at Plattsburgh, a spontaneous movement of United States citizens for self-defense.
When did we do the old New York Times Sunday edition book at my house? Was that a part of one of our other shows, or did we do a separate one?
No, it was part of another show. I can't remember which particular show it was
But I
part
had
of.
the Sunday edition of the New York Times with lots and lots of stories like this. And look at these pictures. Aren't they great?
Yep. Just
An armored motor car. Oh, my goodness.
yeah, and of course you can't talk about it without talking about Leonard Wood, Major General Leonard Wood, who was the driving force behind this, and a close personal friend of Theodore Roosevelt, who you mentioned. But
Absolutely.
it's just amazing that these people, on their own, saw the need, and the patriotism, and to know that they needed to defend this country. It's easy for us right now. A couple of weeks ago, when the problem in Egypt was about a week and a half old, I had a 34-year-old say, "What are you concerned about? What is this? It's not bothering you. Well, it's not bothering us. What's that got to do with us?"
Can you imagine?
It's just amazing that people today.
You have to tell people, sit down a minute. Let me tell you how it's going to bother me.
How we could definitely be called into some kind of a huge world conflict.
Oh my
in
goodness!
around that
Now
area.
as we're talking this, the tremendous upheavals in Libya, and you're private citizens trying to act peaceably to get changes in their government are being murdered, and there was a story in the news about pilots in a jet who were ordered to strafe these people, and they jumped out of their plane and crashed the jet rather than kill innocent people.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And who's going to follow these despots? Could be a lot worse than what we've got right now.
We just have no clue.
Yes,
we
so
just
that's the real scary part is who's going to follow these people? Who's going to fill that vacuum? And so world events can start, and that's what World War I was, just a couple of small things that ignited and burst all these.
And it was hailed, as you said, there was another dimension to that when it was called a war to end all wars. And
Yeah.
Now, in retrospect, it's ludicrous. But Major General Leonard Wood was here often. He fought for this Plattsburgh idea. And if you haven't heard of Major General Leonard Wood, then you've heard of Fort Leonard Wood, perhaps. Maybe you were stationed there, so you know what we're talking about. This is a great publication, Calvin. This is also in really beautiful shape, isn't it?
Yep.
Oh,
amazing.
my.
With all the paper drives that were had over the years, that stuff like this still exists.
This is when they first started the Plattsburgh Idea, the first year, August 28th, 1915. Price 10 cents, $3 a year. Oh, that's great stuff. I think you ought to start your own library.
Here's from September 4th, and this is Harper's Weekly.
Oh, yes, Harper's Weekly, of course.
And it says, again, 1915, and the story is Plattsburgh, How It Works. And so they got the story on what the whole idea was about and how the training took place.
First lesson with a service rifle, a class in artillery, the mechanism of a field piece, close order drills, and they did. They put them through everything. I mean, these are rich people, right?
Oh yeah.
Necessarily,
not all of them, but a lot of them.
But many were well-to-do people who paid to go to get in the trenches, as we say. You know, they didn't always had the most sanitary conditions. What they went through during this whole thing was truly amazing. Look at this. This is nice. I like this one. Well, you're developing a pretty good archive.
Yep. Well, what's nice about getting some of these papers is that you find out what else was happening in the world at the same time.
Certainly. A lot of sports in Harper's Weekly was well known.
But they talk about the war, and here's the September 11th, 1915 edition. And again, this is basically the first real year of the Plattsburgh Idea.
Mm-hmm.
And the cover shows babies from Haiti, the German controversy, English blockade, Mexico, and it says "left at our door." And that's some of the problems that were out there. As we mentioned in part 2 of this series, Mexico was a question mark, as it's becoming right now, as it's becoming all over again. But it was a question mark at that time, and so these, in the Harper's Weekly was the magazine, the weekly newspaper of the time.
And certainly it was, yeah. And there was some question as to whether this whole idea would work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what it was all about. Oh, look at this. Oh, these cartoons. Teddy, that does look like a Galvin.
It does, yes.
Oh, there were some great cartoonists during this time period. With the cartoons that started, I remember seeing them, not that I was alive then, but in the publications and the New York Times during the Civil War. And cartoons were just really coming into their own during this time period in 1915.
Yeah, and as we covered in Chapter 2, when we looked at the Plattsburgher, I can't remember the guy's name offhand, but the artist for Mutt and Jeff was there at
yes.
Plattsburgh, and he drew some of the cartoons. I'm not quite sure. I haven't looked in here for a while to see what's in here. This is from, I don't see a date on that just yet, but here's Roosevelt.
Oh, there they are together right here.
And Mr. Wood.
Oh, yes.
That was, of course, right there in Plattsburgh.
Yeah, Bigelow Studios.
Yep. And
that's a famous picture. What a great shot.
Yeah, and there's Leonard Wood all duded up.
Oh, these are great. Yeah, Teddy and Leonard Wood right there.
Yeah.
Those are great.
And this was, they had their own little camp newspaper, and this was issue number 1, volume 1. And this is from 1916, included an interview with General Wood. And
the whistle.
Yep. And it had a roster of L Company in this particular issue, and again, it's more history on what was happening, but they did have their own little camp newspaper. So the guys who came here, I'm sure, all went home buying at least one of those.
I don't believe I've ever seen this one though. The whistle. That's not.
No, that was just a local thing that you'd only get if you were here at the Plattsburgh
Volume
camp.
1, number 1. You might as well get the good one.
Yeah,
that's great, Calvin.
Yeah, and of course, Plattsburgh at the time was as well known as any city in the country. It's hard for us to believe that right now, but that's the case. That's the way it was, because at the time transportation was railroad or boat, and with Lake Champlain and with the D&H, you had both. So it's just as easy to get to Plattsburgh as it was to get to any other place.
Sure.
And Plattsburgh, with its history and its nearness to the Adirondack Mountains, for the people that all the millionaires that had camps and homes up there, it was an extremely well-known area. And we mentioned in Chapter 2 about the movie Joan of Plattsburgh.
Oh yes.
And you didn't have to explain what that was. People hear that title, Joan of Plattsburgh, they knew what it was. And there was a lot of advertising. Here's a Bull Durham tobacco. At Plattsburgh, they roll their own. They don't have to explain what Plattsburgh is all about. People knew.
Isn't that wonderful?
So they rolled their own cigarettes and pipe smokers and so on.
Rolling their own comes naturally to the men who don the khaki of Uncle Sam. underline the convenience of that famous Muslim sack holding enough Bull Durham tobacco for rolling 30 to 40 fresh cigarettes appeals to them and the best smoke tactics. Isn't that amazing? Oh, I love it.
This is a little flyer that was put out for the 1916 camps that just explained what was expected of you, what you could expect when you got here.
The qualifications, the period, location, camp equipment, uniform and personal equipment, transportation, expenses, inoculation, instruction, organization, examinations, and books on military manners. Oh, yes, that's great.
And there are two pictures. This is the cover of that second Harper's that I just had, but it shows John Perry Mitchell, who many people today might not recognize the name, but in the 19-teens, he was the mayor of New York City.
Absolutely was. Physical activities, athletic type, a corporal in a short time. Oh, this is great. John Perry Mitchell.
And this is a photo that I obtained of the mayor. It's a little bent, but it's still a very interesting photo of the mayor of New York City coming here as a private to learn how to become a military officer. He was only 35 years of age at the time.
Absolutely.
You know, just amazing that you would get that kind of commitment from somebody of his nature.
He was only one of many.
That's right.
We should also let people know when we have an opportunity here, as we told them before, because we used it as a venue for one of our programs, that they can go to the lobby of Plattsburgh City Court on the base oval, and I imagine that information that we saw there is still on display now, wouldn't you guess?
I would imagine it is, and I would almost hazard a guess that maybe Judge Clute might have even added to it.
She's written a great deal about this and talked about it, as many other things, because Penny Clute, the Plattsburgh city judge, as we're discussing this, cares a lot about the history of this area, especially about law enforcement and crime.
I'll let you read the caption underneath on what this year is all about.
Music makes red letter days for Plattsburghers. There's that name again. It says, in the lower picture is shown the open-air stadium where concerts are held for future officers at the Plattsburgh training camp. The upper picture shows John Philip Sousa conducting a band concert for the candidates. Don't you love it? Doesn't it make you want to say, da 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 da? American artists from Maine. That's another story on that same page. Those are wonderful photographs. Once again, red letter days for Plattsburghers.
You know, what more famous musical person was there at that time period?
No, of course
than
there
John
wasn't.
Philip Sousa.
Boy, if you haven't heard those original recordings, and he was a madman when he directed that band.
Yeah. Again, we've got, we may have covered this one. This was a junior camp in 1918.
On Lake Champlain, 500-acre campus. Bomb throwing, naval unit, cavalry hike, map making, miniature trench making, instruction aircraft motors. How about that, huh? Junior Plattsburgh Summer Vacation Military Training Camp. Train without strain. How's that, huh? Somebody was into marketing before Wall Street. The problem solved.
So that was probably doing the younger people, you know, the people just getting into college or whatever. That you know, wasn't the people who were in business already that would probably come to that one.
And they used U.S. Army and Naval officers for the training here.
Oh yeah, all these were.
We've had that's something else we haven't mentioned in a while. Various military groups occupied Plattsburgh Air Force bases, including the Army and the Navy, and of course the United States Air Force. We love that song, don't we? And you got it. You got a beautiful copy of it.
On the Plattsburgh, the Plattsburgh March, we had that. We showed that and listened to it as part of part 2. We also showed some of these posters. Before there was Rosie the Riveter, there was Plattsburgh, and this was again in the World War I era. This one here says the Minutemen of today are going to Plattsburgh. Are you trained to do your share, Plattsburgh? So they were really getting at you to do your part and become an asset to your country and help to defend it.
Well, there's so much discussion about whether you had to be inducted into the services or whether you should do your duty and join up. And that's what the whole Plattsburg idea was about. People who cared so much about their country that even though some of them were multi-millionaires when they came here, they were willing to train and serve.
I'm not sure if we showed this picture the last time, but
I don't think so. I like that one.
And that has to be prior to the era of what we're talking about. I would think, looking at the uniforms and the wagon and so on, it looks like it. But it's such a clear picture that I don't know.
Absolutely beautiful shot.
I'm not sure. I don't think I have a date on that picture anywhere.
No, what a shame. We might be able to track it down. That's a great shot, though.
Oh, that's from the Oval, yeah.
Oh, yes, there were horses here. The cavalry was here at big time during 1915 and 16.
Now, what I'm going to be doing after you and I do this is, unfortunately, with me unable to have a camera person here today, I'll be putting in a lot of these photos after the fact.
You've done that before.
Yeah, so
just so people know, it's
so some of the photos,
it's time intensive.
Yeah, some of the photos may or may not pertain to what we're talking about at a particular time, but they. Okay, I'm going to have to take a break because I've got 2 of these books, and I only see one in front of me. The next segment we're going to want to do, I'm going to need both of them. So.
Oh, really?
I got to find the other one. So we're going to take a break right now. We're going.
All right. Get a cup of coffee and come back and see us. And we continue our program on February 24th, 2011. Talking about the training camps, the military officers training camps, 1915 and 16, and on into the future here at the former Plattsburgh Air Force Base, Plattsburgh Barracks, and around the Plattsburgh Oval. Apparently that's where the word Plattsburghers was born. I didn't know that. These were wonderful training camps that were held and brought some famous people and some people who were to become famous to Plattsburgh during that time period. Lots and lots of people. This is did you find the other copy of the book? You did!
Yes, there's the other copy, yeah.
The Views of 1st Training Regiment at Plattsburgh, New York, 1915. Exactly the same except for cover?
Just for the cover, yep. I love the introduction by Major General Wood. The founders of our country tried to impress upon the American people that peace is best secured by preparedness. And that's what this was all about, preparedness.
Trained and disciplined militia.
Yep. And this shows that 1915, and there's so many nice pictures here that...
wonderful photographs.
We got General Wood on his stallion, commanding the Department of the East. You got Captain Halstead Dory, 5th Infantry.
Straight as a rail. The man just stands there.
Captain Gordon Johnson, 11th Cavalry. I bet you both of these dogs are probably dead now. That Captain.
Or you think maybe they are from 1915?
And of course, the horses, as we see with Captain Collins here, it can't be had a first name, but horses were so much still part of the, of the military.
Goodness, absolutely.
But these pictures were taken in and around the camp. You got Major J.R. Kelly, 10th Infantry, G.H. White, Captain, Lieutenant Sutherland, First Lieutenant Ralph Parker.
There are many people with those names still existing, living here in Clinton County, and you wonder how many could possibly be descendants of some of these people who were here. Because we did have some local businessmen and civilians who were involved in these camps.
Yes, but the vast majority of them were people that came here just for that short period of time. There was a Captain Reed and a Captain Reagan, but it shows, what's more important to me in some of these pictures is what's around them rather than what they look like. There's a lot of individual photos, but here we get into a general view of the camp from an elevation looking due north. So of course the lake is to the east, but it gives you an idea. It's probably taken. You see the highway real close. I'm not sure if that would be taken.
That would be Route 9, and it's pretty darn close
I'm
right
not
there.
sure how close the stone barracks are. If they would be standing on the roof of the stone barracks, that seems a little close to Route 9 for that to be, but there you see Route 9 to the side of it. And here's another one showing the tentage. Again, with the lake and Route 9 running alongside the camp.
That's the same exact area, only a different perspective on the photograph.
Some of the pictures I'll be showing while we're talking earlier would probably include the people getting off the train, what the train station looked like. And,
sure.
Because right now we've got some people drilling, and we've got a picture of some people not too far from the rail cars. And the rail cars don't look much different than they do today, do they?
No, they surely don't.
This was 100 years ago, and rail cars look an awful lot like they do now. Another drill. A little bit of a band. There's a band marching through. I'm not sure what the dog was doing there.
Dog's a mascot. What you find out if you read about this is that this was a spectacle. I mean, not only at this time period, it was a great spectacle for local people. They weren't used to seeing this much fanfare.
They were the people who had time off were there watching, and as we'll see when we get into that book by Alan French at Plattsburgh, they were also trying to
make a little buck here and there.
Make a dollar here and there.
Sure.
There's another shot of the 1st Regiment training drill with the caboose and the train in the background. Just a great shot. More training pictures. They all kind of look alike, but if you were in there and this was your book, I can imagine that you were kind of excited when you went home and showed the family what you looked like at your training camp.
Sometime you're going to find on the internet one of those great panoramic pictures that you see a lot on the walls of old houses.
They're there all the time. Yeah,
and I had one of my father-in-law during this time period, and it somehow got destroyed, and over the years it fell off the wall, and who knows, got ripped and whatever. But those were great because they would show an entire company, and a panoramic picture that was maybe 4 or 5 feet wide.
Yeah, those show up on a regular basis on eBay. Here's one here that shows some of the housing in the background, some of the houses on the oval. Another one here that shows, I would say this here is probably where one work source is. I don't think that's
right on that side,
running around the corner there in the oval. There's another one with some tents, and here's one there when they're on the highway with the telephone poles, the telegraph poles at the time.
No cell phones back then, right?
No,
No.
it's more with tents. It's more lining up and marching.
Rifle ranges. These are wonderful books. You bought these not at the same time, right?
No,
One and then the other?
yeah, I bought the one with the soft leather cover first, and I bought the other one as a backup. I thought I'd use that one there in your hands more often than I'd use the one I've got in my hands here. Again, we've got some people with their tents,
Yeah.
and here's some shooting, some rifle training
Oh, sure.
on a rifle range.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if that was that area in the new base where they did a lot of rifle training. I don't know.
You know, who knows? It could very well be. I don't know what.
I don't know where they would be shooting without something in the background. I don't see a lake anywhere in sight there. I don't know. There's a cavalry drill, but we do see some in this one here. We see a barn and a little outbuilding.
Yeah, somebody would recognize that if they were still around.
Yeah.
Their uncle or grandpa. You know like what's going to bring today? I have some of the wound leggings. They almost look like an ace bandage. They were khaki in color, olive drab color. My mother saved them for me. That they wrapped. They called them leggings. They wrapped them around the lower part of their legs
Yeah.
as part of the uniform.
Yeah.
I was going to show some of our younger people, especially who may never seen those, because I have them. And of course, at the last moment, I ran out of the house saying goodbye and kissed my wife, and left the leggings behind.
She didn't come running after you, go to you, left her
Oh
leggings.
yeah.
There's an artillery practice, and look at those cannon. I'm not sure what the the back one has a cannon sticking out. I'm not sure what the other one is. It might just carry cannonballs and stuff like that
Yeah,
there,
I
and
think
powder.
that's a yep.
And of course, that
Powder
was
magazine.
that was carried by horse.
Sure.
And an engineering squad again there with some of the buildings from the Oval in the background. And we got a bridge that they built just for the sake of blowing up.
And they did. And you know what they do? If they didn't really blow the bridge up, and you were marching and you were, let's say, the red team and the blue team fighting each other, you'd get to the bridge and think, boy, we got him now. And the guy would come out and say, sorry, just have to make believe this bridge is not here. We blew this bridge
We
up.
blew it up. It's
In
not
your
there.
mind's eye, it's gone.
But this served two purposes here. The engineers learned how to build a bridge, and then they also learned how to destroy it, because you might very well destroy it behind you after you
Oh yeah.
crossed.
We've seen the movies, right? What
Yeah.
was the greatest movie? The Bridge Over the River Kwai.
Yeah. Signal practice again on a rifle range. Targets in the distance. And that Plattsburgh book is great. It's got some great little stories about that. Field hospital members of the training regiment being inoculated for typhoid.
Oh yes. There were shots and needles
they
weren't
got-
nearly as sharp back in those days.
They got their shots, whether they wanted them or
yes.
not. And some of them got their shots before they came, so they wouldn't have to be here with the. Because you and I remember when you used to get a vaccination, it hurt for a couple of days.
I still got the funny little marks on my arm. It was a little different back in those days.
Yes, yes. 3rd Battalion. Here's some calisthenics.
Oh boy, look at that, huh?
Makes you think of your high school
Yes, it does.
phys ed
Lots
class.
of calisthenics.
There's a mess line there. These guys weren't smiling though. They should have been. They're in a mess line. Here's the troops regiment on the march, and being reviewed by General Wood and some guy named Theodore Roosevelt.
Oh yes.
That must have been quite an honor for these guys to to know that Teddy Roosevelt was there reviewing them.
Sure.
Again, we got some people in the trenches. Of course, World War I is certainly remembered
Famous
for the trenches.
trenches, right? Boy, I guess so.
How much time did these guys spend? I imagine as part of their training is digging out those trenches.
Boy, oh boy.
It's certainly an era that we think of as being a long time ago. But when you look at a calendar and always figure it's only 100 years ago.
Yep.
You guys are preparing for a hike and bed making with their furled tents.
Oh, yes.
Learning to make their packs. They have to carry everything that they needed.
Of course.
Cleaning their rifles. An auto car. Look at that vehicle.
Isn't that amazing?
Auto car truck transporting, while on the hike, camp equipment from one camp to another. So they would
They loaded
They-
down
bring the tents and the ropes and
hard rubber tires,
yeah.
wooden spoke wheels.
A Cadillac machine gun truck in action. There's a Cadillac that
Oh,
the
boy.
Transportation Museum should have in its collection.
Yeah, well, they'd love to get any of these vehicles, and you can count on that.
Bivouac camp on the hike. So they didn't just stay there in Plattsburgh. As we'll,
Oh, no, they
as we'll
went-
get into when we get into
Oh,
this
my
book.
goodness, all the way to the border and out west and south and
Yeah, they were up here.
up in this where. Yeah, we
they
got
were-
a bivouac camp in Coopersville, right? Camp at Coopersville, right here.
Yeah, and somewhere in my photos, I have a picture with the Rouse's Point School
Oh, you do?
that became the building for Aris.
Yeah.
The first Aris building in the background. And you can see them out there on what would now be the Rouse's Point Elementary School front yard
Sure.
with the building that was, at the time, the Rouse's Point High School in the
How
background.
about that?
So they were right there in Rouse's Point. Yeah, here's bivouac camp at
At
Coopersville.
Coopersville, right there.
And I'm sure there are people who will know exactly where that is when they see that house on the left.
Yeah.
Robinson Camp. Now I don't know if that's up on the Military Turnpike.
Where the Robinson Tavern was,
Yeah.
could be.
That'd be my guess, is that it would be in that area there. Here's a firing line. Note the hat's concealed by grass. They're just camouflage.
Yeah. tie the twigs on there.
Mess time when you're on the hike. So that must have. Can you imagine being able to feed all these guys when they're out there?
Oh, sure.
They get done their war
yeah.
games and they come in
They love the camp cooks, I'll tell you that. Here's one up in Champlain.
at the battle for an ambush, battalion in ambush at the battle near the town of Champlain. Not much for distinguishing buildings there, and just a few fence posts and so on. But it'd be interesting to know exactly where that photo was, if that was on 9B or Route 9.
Yeah.
Because when they see near the town of Champlain, they might be meaning the village of Champlain, not the town.
And Rouse's Point here in the next picture.
Yep, that's at the reservation. That is that would have to be the Commons, which is the property that went with Fort Montgomery.
Oh, yes.
So as you're
sure.
going up to the border, if you kept, instead of turning toward the bridge to go to Vermont, if you went straight past that road, that Route 2 that went to Vermont, that land on your right there is the Commons. And my neighbors, the Castines next door here from Ridgeview Farm, they owned that property in the 50s and early 60s, and they would keep their cattle out there, their heifers and so on.
Yeah.
So that's what you're seeing there. Is some farmers had their cattle out there, and I would guess the government reservation at Rouse's Point would be the Commons as part of the Fort Montgomery.
Makes sense.
Company C, 1st Training Camp Regiment in action.
In the woods.
First training camp on a hike. Now that looks to me like the Woods Falls area.
You think so?
That looks to me like that bridge that's at the Woods Falls area. So I would think that's between Moores and Altona, Moores Forks. But I'd like some people that see that on a regular basis to comment. But I would guess that that's that old road that's not traveled anymore, but it's right next to the road that's there now on the bridge. And I would think that there is the Woods Falls area in Moores Forks.
You think that stone bridge still exists?
It does.
It does. Good.
Machine gun squad looking for the enemy.
Look at that. Isn't that a riot? On the back of the old trucks.
Yeah, amazing. Another mess time here after a long hike. And the regiment returning to camp after a lecture while on the hike. I imagine they were all ready for a lecture after.
Did you imagine? Do you think there was any loud snoring? I wonder.
And then they have a machine gun in action. And a rangefinder. Ranges on different points in the distance where the enemy is expected to appear are being given to a machine gun operator shown in the picture. So they must be able to set those machine guns. And
yeah, he's got almost like a telescope there on top of there, and he can give the range.
Yeah.
Well, obviously they had to know. You know, when they fired cannons way back into antiquity, they knew how high to raise it, right, and where to go, where the trajectory would go.
But whoever had that wood stacked up for the winter, I hope it was still there when they got done. There's another one at Rouse's Point. And I'm looking in the background, and I'm not sure if that's the fort area or what that is on the higher level there.
You know, that could be. Now that you mention it, I never would have paid attention to that.
I'm not sure.
Because it's just a little blip on the horizon.
Yeah, but it's a higher
Fort
elevation.
Montgomery in the distance.
It does.
Look at
it does say. Oh yeah, Fort Montgomery in the distance.
There
It
you
does
go.
say it. I guess if I'd read instead of looked
Very
at the
good.
pictures.
You're astute, Calvin. That's wonderful.
Here's a bayonet charge, and you see the fences that they crossed. And
my.
let me see if it. I'll take a break just for a moment here because I want to bring in this. What I'm thinking of it here, the Town of Clinton Cherubusco book.
Yes.
This is the one not written by Larry Gooley. This was written by the folks who are. It doesn't even have inside the book. It doesn't even have a list of credit of who put it together. But I got mine from the historian Mrs. Legree. And one of the things in here is talking about Route 189 and talking about the different homes on Route 189. It says on the west side is a home once owned by Violet Nichols and currently owned by Calvin Sears. During World War I, it was a camping ground for soldiers. There was a mock battle which lasted 3 days. Tents were pitched and hundreds of men from Plattsburgh were involved. Farmers had to repair all the wire fences because the troops cut them as they passed through the fields.
You know who Calvin Sears is?
Of course I do. He's a good friend of mine. He's Carol Honig's brother, yeah.
Isn't that wonderful? Everything's connected, Calvin. I love it.
But yeah, just, so when I saw that fence there, I said, oh, that fence probably did not survive.
Didn't make it, huh? Oh, my.
Here's some more artillery. Look at the smoke and gun power coming out of there.
Town of Champlain.
Yep, here's the town of Champlain again, yeah. Here's an army transport wagon train on the hike.
It looks like the old Conestoga wagons there in the
Can
background.
you imagine
Yeah.
looking out your window in 1916 and seeing that marching by? What a sight it must have been, huh? Of course, if you look back 100 years before that, you would have seen real soldiers
Oh, yes.
marching by in a real war
Absolutely.
and not training for what was to be a war.
That's in Peru.
Yep, first training regiment in camp at Peru. They were certainly all over. And here's one with the Adirondacks in the background, so who knows, that might have been in Peasleyville right there.
Could have been right there in Peasleyville.
Clayburgh, yeah,
sure.
Clayburgh. There's the 3rd Battalion at Clayburgh Camp. Another feeding frenzy here. Field kitchen serving.
These are great books.
Noonday rest after a long hike.
Now you see, we got their feet in the stream there.
Somewhere in those pictures that I'll be adding later, Gordy, is a postcard showing some guys in the lake bathing, and they all got these brown bathing suits on, but you can tell they were painted on.
Really?
They were painted on the postcard. These guys were skinny dipping. These guys,
Of course they were skinny dipping. There are a lot of references to jumping into whatever would cool you down.
yeah.
These hikes and all this training was right in the middle of the summertime, July and August.
Here's the 3rd Battalion just before the action at Katyville.
Oh well, there's some good
Yeah, some good background houses.
landmarks there, sure.
So somebody in Katyville area will know exactly where that is.
Yep.
And here's immediately after an engagement west of Alsable Forks.
Yeah, this training was far-reaching in the area. If you don't get the message now, you will when you look at some of these pictures. Black Brook.
Black Brook at the heart of the Adirondacks. Again, the Adirondacks in the distance. Battalion on a hike. Clayburgh fording the Saranac River. Some guys concealed in the shrubbery. Advancing on the enemy. There's a barbed wire fence. That's that was probably soon to be history.
Oh yeah.
And color guard on the 3rd Battalion at retreat at the Katyville camp with the flag. So just
Oh, those are wonderful books. This one is just like brand new.
yes, and they're just
Beautiful.
so much history in those books.
Because I'm sure, even though we found people who were plenty old enough to remember the maneuvers from 1939, and after we did that show with Nap Light, I had several people, hey, why didn't you call me? I was there, my brother was there, my father was there. But there are people who are watching this program whose uncles, maybe, were at this place. I have no idea whether my uncle, who was in the First World War that I grew up with, came to this. He could have from downstate,
Obviously, there's nobody who went to this camp that's still around. This camps were 100 years ago, and they'd have to be in their 20s or 30s.
We only have one surviving World War I veteran, and he's 110 or 11.
Well,
and he lied about his age.
There's two. There's the old guy in Gasoline Alley is still alive.
Oh yeah, he's still there.
Sometimes you find something that are very personal, and this is a fragile, personal Company D scrapbook that's not much left to it, given and dedicated to Jerry Bronner from Marie Thomas.
Wow, Calvin.
And it's
a personal scrapbook from this time period.
It has a whole bunch of pictures.
Oh my!
Of Plattsburgh war games.
And how far did this come through the mail when you got it?
I can't remember exactly where I got it from, but this is as Western Mass Guardsmen began war maneuvers at Plattsburgh. So this was all, and the newspapers were there covering this.
Oh, certainly, big time. New York Times was here every day.
They would send their photographers up, the reporters up, and if 10 people from Springfield, Massachusetts were here, then then back home in the papers
would be here, sure.
Yep, and these are all pictures that are just so old, and it's just an amazing thing here that this is held up for however long it is held up.
Is this somebody?
There's Springfield Union photo. I just said Springfield, and
yeah,
it was Springfield.
So this is somebody's loved one who kept this scrapbook.
And when that person passed on, nobody in the family cared enough to keep it. But the Army is too weak. General Drum grimly warns the nation. Cannot protect U.S. adequately, Commander says.
4 guardsmen are felled by lightning. A 5th loses a thumb. Wow. Scenes. Look at that with the tanks. Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Oh, this is a real treasure. Because as you said before, Calvin, it's somebody's personal history.
That's right.
With pencil drawings, and pretty darn good ones too, by the way, along with newspapers.
Yep. But so many postcards and newspaper pictures are available from these eras that it's just incredible. Again, just photo after photo. This is General Hugh Drum I'm thinking this here is probably, now that I look at it with General Drum, it might even have been the 1939 maneuvers. We'd have to dig back and find out when General Drum was around and see. But
I would say that looks more like the 1930s on that.
yeah, looks like this might be the 1939 maneuvers, but still, it's still a
Oh my goodness,
priceless piece
it's
of
wonderful. Are you
history.
kidding me?
I really can't thank Knoplight enough for what he did to help us get through that.
Well, you know, Knapp is just one of those guys who had an orchestra for years and years and years, and I won't say he's long in the tooth, but he's he and I are at the crest of the hill, let's say.
Yeah.
Every year when I see him at New Year's, he said, "Gordy, I really miss it. I wish I had a gig for New Year's." He'd have his drums and he'd be there.
Yeah, this was 39. So
Yep.
we did jump a quarter of a century, but
Oh, we're allowed. We're allowed.
yeah, but it's still an amazing part of the Plattsburgh history, and it's a deteriorating scrapbook.
Sure.
But getting into we're going to get into this book here at Plattsburgh. And again, this is 1916, I think, is what they refer to. So I did find this saved by shopping at the new Cash Bargain store in Altona, New York. And this is what the prices were at the time. Boys' two-pants suits were $6.95, $7.75, or
$12.50
up
for
to
a really
$12.50.
good one.
Yeah.
Sure.
men's
Oh,
and-
that's beautiful.
and you could buy just about anything there. Dresses $1.49, raincoats $3.39, dress shirts 63 cents.
Boys golf hose. Oh, 75 cents.
Their opening day was April 24th. I think this was 1915 or 1917.
Perfect. Men's dress shirt, 63 cents.
Yep. So
Oh, that's a treasure. That's nice.
yes. So that's something that I'm not sure if that was from the Morsefield collection or not. I think it was. Printed by the Morsefield Press in Champlain. Okay, next, as we'll probably be showing a lot of the postcards and pictures. I was able to find one.
You got a stereoscopic
stereo
picture.
picture.
Yeah. Wow, that's wonderful. It's far too small for me to read, so I'm not sure what studio it came from. I just didn't bring my reading glasses, but it's great. I can read Plattsburgh, New York, but I can't see the rest of the
Yeah.
writing. That's great.
Yeah, it's the New England boys practice trench digging in
Oh,
Pine
there
Grove.
you go. Pine Grove?
Pine Grove, which was at Plattsburgh, but Pine Grove, Plattsburgh, New York. So it must have been that could have been right,
Could be the Pine Grove in Katyville right there.
or it could be that by the cemetery that
Yeah, sure.
they could have been doing that right there. But this one here is a postcard of downtown Plattsburgh in I think around 1910. That just shows the era that we're talking about. That's
Sure.
a couple of.
Oh, that's the bridge.
Yep.
That's the Bridge Street
Yep.
Bridge right there.
But that's what it looked like in the rest of the world while this was going on.
Absolutely.
So we will be showing some
Yeah,
pictures, including a colorized postcard of Teddy
Oh,
Roosevelt.
that famous pose, huh?
Yep. So I think the next thing we want to do is get into this at Plattsburgh. This was a novel. It's fiction, but it's a love story. But it's set in Plattsburgh, and this was by a man who attended the camp. So what he's kind of doing here is bringing out his experiences and putting them in a story form. So it gives you a real life of what it was like in the camp. So we've gone through there and we've marked off a few things in yellow. So I'll
It's
ask you
wonderful,
to.
and we will. You can tell I've got my sticky notes on here. Alan French was a very prolific writer, historian, speaker. He wrote a lot of children's books and a lot of history. He was a real nut on the battles of Lexington and Concord way back when, but he lived a good long life right up until 1946. He was born in 1870, and it's an interesting concept to come here, look through the camps, and then in 1917 publish a book as if you were young guys who were at the camp writing home to mom.
Yep.
There's one main character and several other characters. Did you ever wonder who the person is who signed the front of this book, Calvin?
I have no idea. There's a couple of signatures
It
there.
says Curtis 1917 and Robert J. Couan, Couan. And I was about a hair's breadth from trying to do some research on that name today just to see what it would turn up in the archives.
Yeah, whether that's Coon or Cowan or...
Yeah, C-O-U. It looks like C-O-U-A-N.
Yeah,
But somebody had this. This is a much more modern.
that's my phone number.
Oh, that. Oh, it is. Oh, okay. That's because that's even after the Jordan and Axminster days, huh?
Yeah.
518. Anyway, of course, it says Plattsburgh without the H, and Calvin says every once in a while a copy of this will come up because there was a soft cover and a hard cover. And I'm guessing this didn't sell 10,000 copies when it was first printed in 1917. Although it's a famous printer, a famous publisher, Charles Scribner and Sons, 1917. But in the bibliographies that I could find by Alan French of all the stuff he wrote, dozens of books, this one is not mentioned that often. So I have no idea how you managed to scarf this up, but you've seen it again, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It appears a couple times a year at least.
It is interesting, and he has a very interesting way of writing. He tries to use some of the nomenclature that the troops used when they were here. He gives us, a lot of the words that they used. He describes the dust and the dirt and the jumping into the ponds, and he apologizes in his foreword that he left out some of the most important things, but he said he couldn't get everything in here, so he did his best. And some of the people, he said, even though the name is different, you might recognize yourself in there.
Yes, because again, he was at this camp in 1916, and that's what the book is all about.
Well, you went through and actually wrote in yellow. Do you know how hard it is to see yellow late at night?
Depending on the lighting, yes.
I had my reading glasses on last night, and you just found things that caught your eye. Do you want me to read them,
Yes.
or do you want to?
No, I want you to.
Well, we're on page 66. In case you have a book that you want to follow
Yeah.
along with.
Turn your Bible to page 66.
I love the line. The crowd instantly nicknamed him, "Come on, Cupid, and measure yourself." But Cupid had his doubts and so retired. The lecture being over, we talked about the lectures, right? So was the rain. There's a lot of rain in this book, by the way.
He was there in a muddy autumn.
But the captain took us out on that rolling country that flanks the Peru Road and gave us a fight with an imaginary enemy. Through wet bushes, across a dump, over and among little sand and gravel pits, finally ambushing with great care an innocent Catholic cemetery. The guy's got a sense of humor, doesn't he?
So somewhere in Peru, people can figure out where that took place at a
Who
Catholic
knows?
cemetery.
I know where most of the cemeteries. It would get our buddy Ron Allen to go out, he and Carol scouting the cemeteries to see where that might have
Find
been.
some shells.
So we move forward to page 69 when it said there is an official photographer. And that would probably be those people from the Bigelow Studios that we've seen all their names on there.
Probably, yes.
There is here an official photographer who sends out cameramen to take us in all sorts of occupations, at the skirmish line, on parade, cleaning our teeth or our rifles. Everything's connected. I was driving up here and it said 1938. Well, the first thing that was made out of nylon, what was it? And you would have thought nylons.
Toothbrush.
Toothbrush. It was a toothbrush. Before that, and it wasn't until the armed services that men were required to clean their teeth. It might have started right here at Plattsburgh.
Who knows?
It really became an official requirement in the Second World War Before that, people were using pieces of wood to clean their teeth
Just
with,
toothpicks.
and hog bristles and whatever they could do. But now we had real toothbrushes later on. I'm sorry, we digress.
That's all right.
All right, on the skirmish line on parade, cleaning our teeth or our rifles, marching and skylarking. Don't you love it? The pictures are all of the postcard size, and Calvin has some.
Yes.
And
They're
in
plentiful.
in due course are exhibited at the studio where we go and inspect and buy. Everybody making a buck, right?
Yeah.
Most of these guys had the money to spend. He's always out of pictures of lieutenants, captains, the general, and other popular subjects. But by perseverance and patient waiting, one can accumulate a record of his life here. Luck will put a fellow on an average into a few groups a week, as you see in the ones I've sent you. I'm shivering, he goes on. Signed, Dick. Oh, these are just so absolutely wonderful.
This whole book is not authored by supposedly one person. It's a series. Most of them is this one person, but there's also other letters home from other people in the camp.
Yeah.
And they're giving views of each other,
Oh, sure. And there's some really humorous stuff. Oh, here we are on page 110. And it says 150 men shooting 10 rounds each. That meant 1,500 shells left on the ground with 300 clips, all of brass. I bet you our viewers are saying, I know what comes next. I noticed some rather untidy figures emerging from the miserable little shacks that dotted the scrub, slinking through the brush in our direction and gathering on the flanks of our firing line. 8 or 10 men and boys and girls, one of the latter carrying a baby. Near me, Captain Kirby cursed them under his breath as human buzzards. Everywhere in this book, about every third page, they talk about the buzzards. And it's not the buzzards in the sky.
It's us.
It's us going in there to make a buck and picking up the stuff. All right, and I understand that these camp followers, I called them groupies, had not gathered merely to admire. As soon as the last platoon filed off the ground, these persons slipped forward and began eagerly to pick up the treasure that lay scattered there. With brass at 25 cents a pound, that was pretty good. War prices, they made enough scratching in the dirt to keep them going for the next week or so. Isn't that great?
But these people really resented the locals. And I'm
yeah,
sure
they did.
his view of the locals was average for what those people were.
And it's too bad because once again, as we mentioned toward the beginning of the program, and we'll mention again, many of these people who came to the military officers training camps at Plattsburgh were privileged.
Yes.
I mean, they were born with silver spoons in their mouths.
Right.
And I'm sure they made certain demands, even though they had to wallow in the dirt. They had pretty good chow, maybe delivered on the side by somebody
Well, some of them bought pies
on a
the
train.
locals.
But the local buzzards, as they were called, were actually good people who saw a way to profit a little bit. And when they go up toward Moores or Champlain, if the local church women put on a little church feed that night, they were bivouacked somewhere,
Sure.
the guys would sneak out of the camp and go to the dinner, right?
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't sneak out, but they'd go out, yeah.
Well, in some cases, he said they snuck out.
Yeah,
'cause they probably weren't supposed to go. Anyway, we're up to page 190. And this was Dick Goodwin, the guy that we talked about being the main character who writes many letters. West Beekmantown, New York, Monday the 25th at 3 p.m.
I think I just wanted to mention, just to show
Just
that,
because it was West Beekmantown.
where they were, and this was in the March. This was their first. This was his first hike letter. This Private Goodwin is described here as kind of a soft mama's boy type of guy. When he gets there,
absolutely.
and when he leaves, he's become more of a man.
He's become more of a man. Maybe his mom's the one that put the scrapbook together. Who knows? So here we are. We're on page 193. It says, but outside the sacred enclosure of the camp, yet as near as they can squeeze are the buzzards. They're the buzzards again. Each with his little outfit for following the hike. A scrawny horse, a little tent, a board on 2 barrels, and a big sign. These with indigestible constituting their outfits. And it goes on to say, in the camp wander men with baskets or boys with boxes selling fruit, tobacco, and chocolate. There are farmer folk, too, gawking about at the show. And here I can interject a personal note because my father-in-law, the late Alfred Vaughn, who, they lived in Altona and Jericho at that time, and he told me many stories about them taking things out, and he was born in 1898, so he would have been 17, 18 years old at that time. He was probably one of those buzzards that could make a little money, because, if these guys were hungry enough for a fresh apple, they could sell an apple for maybe a quarter and make a couple of bucks, or their mothers would make pies and sandwiches and a lot of good things to develop or to deliver, and we've heard them talk about selling. Not only were buzzards popular during 15 and 16, but then in 1939 there were local buzzards that made a lot of money as well, Calvin, right?
That's right. They were just trying to make an honest dollar.
There's West Beekman Town again. And there's the orders for today have been issued. The enemy cavalry and machine guns are at Scioto. There you go, the Tri-Cities, some miles north of us. We are to go against them with our battalion as advance guard. Company I at the lead, our company, supporting them 400 yards behind. Resting on the road, he says. Isn't that wonderful? Here's another one on page 204. Then awash in oh such a soft-bottomed sluggish brook. Isn't this guy great? Where many shaved, and others, to my amazement, cleaned their teeth. For that ceremony, I kept my canteen water served out to us at the head of the company street in proper dippers by orderlies. Isn't that amazing? It's all that I shall have, I foresee, both for drink and for absolutely necessary water. I don't know. You made some marks on the side, but I can't.
It says September 26th would be the date.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The date would be September 26th of that year.
But I have to mention that maybe they had toothbrushes and maybe they didn't, because in the early days, especially during around the turn of the century, they would sometimes clean their teeth with a rag dipped in that awful stuff, whatever my mother made us use when we were little kids. Because there was tooth powder in those days. I never saw toothpaste until I was an adult. Tooth powder. Dr. Lyon's tooth powder.
Oh.
But my mother, in lieu of that, and we were very, very poor, they would use mix something with water. Make a paste of one of the cleaning materials that was obviously non-toxic, I think.
You hope.
They'd make a powder, and that's possibly what they did, using their finger or a rag or whatever. But the fact that they cleaned their teeth counts for something.
That's right.
I love it. All right, moving right along to page 208. From Private Goodwin to his mother. There we are, Scioto again.
Beautiful downtown Scioto.
Wednesday the 27th. We were assembled in line at 5:25, reported, stacked arms, and were ordered, remember, we're there to camp on this same ground tonight, strike tents, and make packs. Make up blanket rolls and squad bags, and bring them to the head of the street. Oh, the disgust. The orders were proper for the 1st Battalion, which marches on to Altona today, but for us, it seemed needless. Wow. Okay, next page. The day is warm with a wind from the west, but there are gathering clouds. And I'm going to use the time which is left in digging with my bayonet a ditch around the tent. I love it. In West Scioto? Question mark. At any rate, an inhabited crossroads. Oh, I'm lying on my back in the wet grass while the captain explains that the sound at a little distance, as of a lot of carpenters nailing at the boarding of a new house, is our patrols firing at a party of cavalry that's opposing our advance.
Now I'm wondering if West Scioto would be where the D&D meets building is on Route 22, because originally Scioto was by the railroad track,
Mm-hmm.
which was east of Route 22, and now Scioto is considered to be on Route 22. So at that time period there, so West Scioto, with his thing in question mark there,
Well, there you go.
was probably on Route 22. That's
There
why
you
he was
go.
questioning it, because Scioto was actually by the railroad tracks, which was maybe 3/4 of a mile or
Yeah.
a mile east of there.
Yep, you're right.
So-
I never would have thought of it that way. All right, here we are now, in parentheses, north of Scioto on the road to Moores, near Crossroads 79, the weather now dry. We're resting after a skirmish, and as my position is somewhat more comfortable since I am lolling in a ditch instead of lying on my back, perhaps these jottings will be more legible than the last. The skirmish went thus. You know, the best part of it is, guys were writing to their mothers during this
Oh,
time
sure.
period.
Sure. Yeah, they're writing back home.
So wouldn't
They're
you like to
keeping
have a
journals.
group of
I'm
those?
sure they exist somewhere. Some, not all of them, obviously.
Yeah.
But I was reading this, and I reread it. I read it once, and I reread it in September and October. And I'm looking outside in some of these nights, and I'm saying, I don't think I'd want to be out there camping overnight tonight in late September. You know, you get some nice nights, but you also get some cold ones.
Well, then we have the Pike's Cantonment reenactors.
Oh yeah, well, those nights.
And that was my hands were cold holding the camera. And I said to Tommy Prey, is there a problem here? He said, no, as he walked stiffly. Do you know how many layers of clothes? You know what my long johns look like? And it's ludicrous because these guys they take their reenacting very,
Oh, yeah.
very seriously. And most of the guys who were with him that night weren't with him that night. They were inside the museum with no heat in there, so they were just about as cold as he was outside. He says, I've thrown my chewing gum away. Too much swallowing of saliva makes me, hungry. For me, a pebble from the next brook. Oh boy, shades of Demosthenes who carried the pebbles in his mouth. He said, we were at last called back by a whistle and the distant cry, assemble on the left. Once more we marched south, and presently were resting again in West Scioto. As we lolled there buying apples from the native buzzards, there we are, who take to the extortion of the professional without any coaching. Extorting people for fresh apples.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I bet you they got a quarter apiece for the apples, too. All right, we're moving up to page 222. Our diet is the same monotony of wholesome, plentiful food. I'm flourishing on it. Quarter is proud of requiring nothing else. On the other hand, some complain, and Pickle, this is another character who shows up, he writes some letters to his parents at home, and Pickle, having a sweet tooth, at the end of a meal will often go out and feed himself with boughten pies and donuts. How often do you hear that word these days, boughten?
Boughten pies.
Boughten, B-O-U-G-H-T-E-N for English teachers. Boughten pies and donuts. For you must understand that not only do the buzzards follow us from camp to camp, but every farmer's wife along the line of march or near our camp takes a batch of her favorites and puts out a sign. Those along the road must be disappointed. None of us ever fall out, but they make a good sale outside the camp. Oh, yeah. I think he put his finger right on the action, didn't he, this guy?
Unfortunately, we're going to have to maybe skip a couple of these pages that I've noted because
wow.
I just checked the camera and we got an hour 25 right
Do
now.
we really?
Yeah, so we're
So you want to move forward a little bit?
Just, let me just see what
Yeah,
what
you
my
look for
notes are
something.
here.
Well, I'm glad you went through this. Of course, you desecrated a perfectly good book.
Oh, that's all right. It's more valuable now because this was marked up for use for hometown cable.
Oh, of course.
They go on, the Plattsburgh. They go on here into Cherubusco. Here was crossing the Great Shazy River.
Oh yes, I noticed that.
Be
He
up near
described.
Ellenburg. I'd
Yeah, he
imagine.
describes the river very much of what the river is like and which branch they were in. And
Again, here's Altona, Friday, September 29th, waiting for the start. Next note is on the hillside near Ellenburg Depot.
yeah, they did range far and wide, just as they did in the maneuvers later on in 1939.
And here's the people that are cutting the fence in Cherubusco at Calvin Sears' house. And a farmhouse kitchen where some of my things are drying, where I sitting in a chair and writing at a table. And that's in Cherubusco, Saturday the 30th.
Isn't that wonderful.
He didn't mind sitting in that farmhouse kitchen to dry off, though, did he?
Oh,
I wonder if those
even.
were buzzards when
Yeah,
they
well,
took him
you
in to
know.
dry him off. But most of the notes I made in here in yellow were to highlight the location. Again, a camp near Ellenburg Center.
Sure.
That's a little bit south of Cherubusco, so they're probably starting to head back. And
These people are marching, by the way. You know, they're not jumping on a motorcycle and heading for Cherubusco. They're marching.
yeah, that's right. Here they stopped by a schoolhouse at a corner. We rested for a while. And here they mention an odd-looking building which Corder guessed was a creamery.
I wondered when I saw that, would there, some historian would know where a creamery might have been in those days. Because
Well,
this guy must have taken copious notes
Yeah,
as he was
here
marching
he is
with
at
these
Ledger's
guys.
Corners on
Sure,
Tuesday,
Ledger's Corners.
October 3rd. We stumbled down a very stony track till we reached a better road at Halfway House. It's a descending slope of miles to a strip of Champlain, meaning the lake, and beyond, floating down the haze of the Green Mountains of Vermont. I'm just wondering if that's coming down from Dannemora,
Could be.
where you get to see the lake.
Well, they mentioned Dannemora when he talks about the 15-foot high walls as they march through the town. And
Yep, here he is in Katyville now, on October 4th. Dannemora seems to be a town whose prosperity is in this out-of-the-way place depends solely on the great prison that stands
There
in its
you go.
midst. That's what you're referring to.
yeah, marching by 15-foot high walls. Very impressive.
A school was let out. Its scholars came streaming uphill to watch us and to tag along beside us even after we had turned away from the great hospital of the prison and were once more amid farms. So I'm not sure how he went from Katyville back to Dannemora. He seems to be going backwards here. We were delighted the footloose population of Dannemora. I guess is that worse than being a buzzard? Being
I
footloose?
don't know. They were footloose and fancy free.
And perhaps it tantalized the poor fellows behind the bars. Certainly we gave profitable employment to a score of professional buzzards who turned out with their bags to search the woods. But it's just a great book. It's at Plattsburgh, and it's got a lot of. And it's by Alan French.
I doubt if
got a
any of
lot
our. Tragically, I doubt it. But I'm speaking out of turn here because I may be wrong. I doubt if there's a copy of this at Feinberg. I've never looked, and I shouldn't say that without checking. And I doubt if there's a copy at the Plattsburgh Public Library.
I would doubt if many of our libraries have this. Yeah.
Because as I said before, it's not easy to find this book. I did a lot of research and reading about Alan French and everything he did and working up to this time. But it's a fun book to read.
It is.
Because he actually just puts his finger right on the pulse of what at Plattsburgh was all about.
And if you read it like I did in the fall, when this time period is on, and you can just picture yourself out there making this trek all around our North Country, is just
Yeah.
it's,
I hope we've maybe inspired some of our viewers to read more about this Plattsburgh Idea, because it was a very important part of our history. I must confess I did know about it before I moved here in 1961, having spent a lot of time in Moira. And I knew about this military installation, and all the years I was on the radio here, and certainly since then with Calvin, I've attached myself to the military history here, never having served, but appreciated all the stuff that happened here, right down through the years. This is great. Did we finish the chapters?
I think so.
3 chapters on the Plattsburgh Idea.
I think so, and I think what's important too is not just to remember the history of the Plattsburgh Idea, but to remember the history that surrounded our entrance into World War I.
Oh, absolutely.
And to keep that in mind as we look at what's happening around the world, particularly now as we're taping this in 2011. And our next big adventure, not going to be coming up immediately. It'll be a couple of months from now. We want people to show up and contact us, because we want to do a story on the construction of the Atlas missile sites, which is also part of our North Country history and the history, the military history of this region. And through the graces of a fellow who bought this collection on eBay, he scanned them and sent them to me on a CD.
No kidding.
And my friends at the Border Press, the Rochesters, scanned all these. There's a couple hundred pictures here on the construction of the missile
You gotta
bases.
be kidding me.
And we're looking for people who took part in this to contact Gordy or me, and we want to do a story on this. So this is something in the future. This particular picture here is near and dear to me
I
because
can understand
it
why.
shows, it shows a missile driving through Rouse's Point, and my wife's home as a child is sitting there. So and it even tells the date it was taken, which was July 26, 1962. But we got hundreds of these pictures to look at.
Oh, that's marvelous. I can't wait to get into that. That'll be so much fun.
So if you
It changed the face of Plattsburgh and the North Country in many ways, because it brought in so many workers. And there's so much controversy over the Atlas missiles in the first place, or whether they could have fired had we needed them during the Cuban Missile Crisis. In any case, another huge chunk of history. That'll be fun to get into.
That's right. We're looking for people to come up and contact us that were involved in that.
Terrific. This has been a wonderful program. I'm always inspired by it, and I hope you are too. We love your suggestions, your comments, and send money.
Please.
Please send money. Gas prices are going through the roof. We need to get to your house if you want to do a story. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.